It's about a $3 billion industry for tomatoes imported from Mexico, so it is a large percentage.
Those like bananas, so also tomatoes, and maybe avocados, they had a great quality when they come from Mexico.
It is, at the end of the day, all about economics and all about the bottom line.
What happens when Mexico, America's top agricultural partner, suddenly turns its back and Canada brings in $2.8 billion? This is no longer a matter of market competition. This seems to be a sign that the United States is gradually losing its position in its own backyard. In early 2025, the Mexican government plans to stop importing tomatoes from several US states following increased tariffs and quality control barriers. Meanwhile, Canada, which was previously only a secondary partner, immediately took its place. And the result? Over $0.8 billion in contract value has been signed in less than 6 months. How can a single agricultural product reflect the shift in power across the entire North American region? And what awaits America if this trend continues with corn, wheat and beef? This video could be the answer. This video aims to analyze and reflect on trends based on publicly available information. We are not advocating for or attacking any specific country or policy. At the end of the video, you'll see a new trade map where the US is no longer the center, but the one left out. Watch the whole thing to understand the real reason and why this is worrying both farmers and US officials. Let's get started. There are decisions that seem technical, but create cracks that extend for thousands of miles. And then from just a 17% tariff, we are witnessing not only a reversal in one industry, but also a shaking of trust between the two nations. Once a silent pillar, keeping North American trade relations running smoothly, the 2019 agreement suspending the tomato dispute between the US and Mexico allows billions of dollars of Mexican agricultural products to enter the US without being taxed as long as prices remain stable, avoiding dumping. That agreement was likened to a kind of agricultural peace treaty, not glamorous, but important. It helps American supermarkets have an abundance of tomatoes year-round, while Mexican farmers have a stable outlet for their produce. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until July 2025, when the US announced its withdrawal from the agreement as if delivering an unexplained goodbye letter, and immediately imposed a 17% tariff on fresh Mexican tomatoes, alleging long-standing dumping, according to an official announcement from the US Department of Commerce on July 14, 2025. According to the US Secretary of Agriculture, this tariff action is from Washington's perspective to protect farmers in Florida and Arizona, who have long suffered losses due to unfair trade practices that have driven down prices for products like tomatoes. But is that the only reason? Why would a tax of only 17%, which isn't that large in international trade, have such a significant impact? Perhaps it's because this isn't just about money, but a story about trust. When a trade agreement is unilaterally broken, especially with a close and long-standing neighbor, the message sent is not just that we want to impose tariffs, but rather, we are willing to change the rules of the game at any time. In the modern business world, where supply chains depend on hourly schedules, stability is more valuable than profit. And that is what was shaken. A trade expert commented on CNN that 17% is not just a number. For Mexican farmers, it's a reminder that they can be pushed off the table at any moment with just a stroke of a pen. While the White House chief claims this tomato tariff move will be a game changer, a beneficial turning point for American citizens, some states like Florida are rejoicing while distributors, retail chains, and the food service industry are left in a passive position. Because over 60% of fresh tomatoes in US supermarkets come from Mexico, according to data from the US Department of Agriculture. In an interview with CNN, Teresa Razzo, the owner of an Argentinian-Italian restaurant in Southern California, said, "I'll be bankrupt in just 3 months." Someone who used to eat out more than 3 times a week might now only go once or twice because we were forced to raise prices. It is known that at her restaurant, tomatoes are an indispensable ingredient for salads and marinara sauce. Some large businesses will avoid taxes by using tomatoes grown in the US. For example, Heinz only uses domestic tomatoes for the ketchup products sold in the US. DiGiorno also claims their frozen pizza sauce is made from California tomatoes. However, many small businesses, like Apollonia's Pizza in Los Angeles, have no choice but to continue using Mexican tomatoes. Co-owner Justin De Leon said they accepted a loss rather than raise the price of toppings. He shared, "We change our supply seasonally to get the freshest tomatoes, sometimes from California, sometimes from Mexico. I just hope this storm passes quickly. However, not everyone has the strength to endure. It's hard to believe. A seemingly simple fruit, yet it's linked to so many points in the supply chain, from farms in Sonora to kitchens in Dallas, and then the lunch of a retired couple in Ohio. Now every link feels shaky. But you know what? What surprised many people was not that the US imposed tariffs, but that Mexico didn't react in the usual way. Do not send suggestions. Don't go into the water. No exceptions. Instead, they turned their backs. Quiet, but very systematic. Agricultural associations in Mexico appear to be activating contingency plans quietly prepared since 2023, opening refrigerated rail lines to Canada, restructuring logistics, and finding new distribution partners in Toronto and Vancouver. A tearless but decisive goodbye. And now, as the 8 billion tomato crop heads north, the question is, did a protective tariff inadvertently drive away an entire industry? And if Mexico can leave the table, which country will be next? Is it possible that in pursuing trade sovereignty, the United States is weakening its position in the eyes of its partners? This isn't just a lesson in policy. This is a reminder that in the world of commerce, trust is more fragile than the supply chain. And once it's broken, it may never be put back together the way it was before. There's no loud noise, nor did they strongly oppose or compromise. Mexico didn't choose to be loud. They chose to leave quietly, but decisively. After the US decision to withdraw from the tomato agreement on July 14, 2025, many people who had hoped Mexico would renegotiate, would compromise as they had done in the past, were disappointed. But this time there was no letter of appeal. There will be no negotiation rounds. Instead, what's happening is a series of closed-door meetings between Mexican export associations, the federal government, and representatives of logistics businesses. Plan B, which had been secretly prepared since the 2019 tax round, seems to be being activated in the first week after Washington's announcement. The president of the ANAM Association, which represents thousands of tomato farmers in the Bajío region of Mexico, told Mexico New Daily, "We no longer want to build houses on land that could collapse at any moment. We need a stronger foundation, and the foundation they're aiming for is not far away at all. Right north of the United States, instead of continuing to transport products through the Texas and Arizona border crossings and having to wait for hours between inspection processes, paperwork, and storage conditions, Mexico has completely changed direction. According to FreightWave's logistics analysis, refrigerated rail, a mode of transport traditionally limited to the domestic market, is now being expanded to connect the Bajío agricultural region with distribution centers in Ontario and British Columbia. Not going to America. No US customs clearance required. Don't worry about US taxes. A new track for commerce and a new path for independent thinking. These small tomatoes, once considered an important symbol in trade between the US and Mexico, are now facing a shaky future. For a long time, tomatoes have no longer been just an agricultural product. It's connected to an entire ecosystem, 1.5 million jobs in Mexico, both directly and indirectly. Over 2.8 billion USD in value, accounting for nearly 1/3 of the country's total fresh agricultural export value. This is also a top 3 item in over 15 states from Jalisco to Sinaloa. And now the plump, soft red tomato has become the coldest declaration: we're not playing on your field anymore. The words were unspoken, but they were expressed by each wheel rolling over the tracks, each refrigerated container silently leaving Sonora, each long-term contract signed with Loblaw and Metro supermarkets in Toronto. Meanwhile, Canada, a country that previously accounted for less than 0.3% of tomato imports from Mexico, suddenly became the chosen one. And then many people started to investigate why Canada was the reason. No penalty tax, no political risk, no interruption to the election season. and most importantly, having a modern, stable and supply-hungry logistics system. Compared to the long lines at the US border, where each container takes 6 to 12 hours to be inspected, the Mexico-Canada refrigerated train route takes only 3 days, going directly to the distribution point. An analyst at the Trade North America Consortium commented, "If trade is a game of chess, then Canada is the move that caught the US off guard. Many people believe this is a temporary reaction, but the signs indicate that Mexico has been preparing for this for a long time." Development banks like Bancomext have begun providing preferential financing for northbound logistics routes since late 2023. Meanwhile, agricultural associations signed an MOU with Canadian partners from early 2024. And according to data from the Canada Border Services Agency, the number of applications for tomato import codes from Mexico increased by over 400% in the second quarter of 2025 alone. When people are pushed to endure for too long, the only option left is to leave. Did Washington foresee this? A neighboring friendly nation that was once the most important link in the American food chain has now taken a completely different direction without a word of warning. This is no longer a commercial response. This could be a sign of reshaping the relationship map. The question is, if tomatoes can leave, what else will continue to leave? If Mexico dares to say goodbye, how many other countries are secretly preparing to do the same? Tomatoes once connected two countries from Mexican farms to American dinner tables. But today, that tomato is a farewell. A quiet breakup, but enough to make the entire continent feel a chill. When one door closes, another always opens. But perhaps no one expected that door to be Canada. Prior to July 2025, Canada accounted for a mere 0.3% of Mexico's total tomato export value. Too small, too faint. It's almost not on the strategic map of Mexican agricultural corporations. However, when the US withdrew from the agreement and imposed a 17% tariff on fresh tomatoes from Mexico, Canada quietly stepped in without demanding anything, without making a big fuss, just silently rolling out the red carpet. One country is building a fence, while on the other side of the northern border, another country is opening its glass doors. From Ontario to British Columbia, a series of supermarket chains such as Loblaw, Freshco and Metro began reaching out to Mexican agricultural associations in the second week after the US tax policy took effect. And now, it seems the routes no longer go through the US. Previously, to reach Canada, Mexican goods often had to transit through US territory, which increased costs, complicated procedures, and always carried the risk of being affected by policies from Washington. But now it's different. The cold intermodal trains, connecting from the Bajío region via the Kansas City Southern Mexico Railway through Texas, and then looping up to Saskatchewan, are being restructured to completely eliminate stops in the United States. Or choose a shorter route, go directly to the port of Veracruz, and then take a container ship to Halifax or Vancouver. The Canadian government, with its open trade policy, does not impose any tariff barriers on fresh Mexican tomatoes. Costs of downtime is shortened, and there's no longer a need to guess Washington's mindset every new term. What's remarkable is that Canada not only accepts, but is also prepared to receive. The Canadian Department of Agriculture announced a series of policies to support off-season imports in order to diversify supply. Many distribution chains such as Costco Canada, Farm Boy, etc. have signed long-term MOUs with producers from Jalisco and Sinaloa, according to Mexico News Daily. And according to CNN Business, the import price of Mexican tomatoes at Canadian supermarkets is nearly 12% lower than domestic tomatoes or those from the Netherlands. Quality from Mexico, competitive prices, and no corridor instability. For Canadian distributors, this option is almost a no-brainer. A contrasting shot appears right within the same frame. At the same time, in Florida, American farmers are holding press conferences welcoming tariffs and anticipating higher domestic prices. In Toronto, consumers are receiving fresh, ripe red Mexican tomatoes at a price 15% lower than last month. At the Freshco supermarket in Scarborough, a Canadian retiree shivering from the interview replied, "It's the same tomato, but it feels less pressured eating here." In the US, food is also at risk of being drawn into debates. In Canada, a tomato is simply a tomato, And then this might be the most wow part of the whole story. From importing just a few million USD worth of tomatoes annually, Canada is on track to receive over 1.5 billion USD in tomato exports from Mexico within the next 12 months, according to estimates from the Mexico-Canada Trade Association. A figure no one thought of until the US itself pushed its partner north. This not only brings price benefits, but also makes Canada a crucial link in the Western Hemisphere's agricultural supply chain, which was previously held by the United States. So do you think Canada can replace the US? Not entirely, but it's still possible. Considering the logistics infrastructure, the US is still larger. The border crossing is still faster. The size of the US market is still nearly 10 times that of Canada. However, in a world that values stability, kindness and transparency, Canada has something that money can't buy: trust. And sometimes that's precisely what makes people choose to stay. Canada doesn't race, doesn't shout, doesn't compete. But while competitors put up barriers, Canada quietly opened its doors. And it was in that silence that they became the winners. Who do you think usually suffers in a tariff competition? Are you the person who signed the decision? No. Are you the CEO of a certain corporation? No. The losers are those who are outside that competition. Or in other words, the consumers who don't have much of a voice. A tomato disappeared from the shelf. A salad that's missing ingredients. Dinner wasn't as red as usual. And then, a question appeared in the minds of millions of Americans. Why is everything getting so expensive? The 17% tax on Mexican tomatoes was implemented with the expectation of helping American farmers regain market share. However, what consumers felt most acutely was not the return of domestic produce, but rather empty shelves in supermarkets. Prices go up every week, and the feeling of helplessness as food spending increasingly shrinks the family budget. According to CNN Business Analysis, the price of tomatoes in US markets increased by an average of 24.7% within 3 weeks after the tax took effect. At a supermarket in Houston, the elderly woman living on a pension shared in an interview with NBC, "Tomatoes are something I buy every week. Now I have to consider carefully, because the price is 1.5 times higher, but the quality isn't what it used to be." A meal that was inherently simple, a plate of fried eggs with tomatoes, a mixed salad this evening, became a meticulous calculation, to buy or not to buy. For many Americans, especially those with fixed incomes, this is not just a financial issue. It's the feeling that everyday life is being shaped by decisions made far away, decisions they can't control and weren't consulted about. What few people realized was that tomatoes were only the first domino to fall. According to data from the US Department of Agriculture, the major imported items from Mexico include butter over 3 billion USD a year, strawberries, berries nearly 2 billion USD, beer, juice, consumer electronics. And according to FreightWaves Logistics, Mexican associations are considering expanding their strategy of avoiding the US to other sectors if the tax situation continues to escalate. So what's the real consequence in the end? Restaurants are struggling with ingredients. Supermarkets are shrinking imports. And once again, consumers are left to bear the final cost. Meanwhile, across the border, at Metro supermarkets in Ontario, Mexican tomatoes are overflowing. Fresh, juicy, and the price is even slightly reduced thanks to long-term stable shipping contracts. A simple comparison, but very thought-provoking. On one side are consumers struggling with every penny. On one side is the retailer receiving good quality goods at a good price on time. The supply chain in the north is like a symphony, while in the south it sometimes feels like a rehearsal amidst arguments. The question is, whose interests are tax policies protecting and who is paying the price? The US government believes this move is aimed at protecting domestic farmers, particularly in Florida, Texas, and Arizona, which are major tomato-producing states. But will this protection come too late, when many American farmers had already left the industry years ago because they couldn't compete with the scale, seasons, and climate of Mexico? Will building a fence in 2025 be able to reverse the changes from the previous decade? And while farmers are protected by tariffs, consumers have no shield against rising prices. There are consequences that cannot be measured in money. Loss of confidence in the ability to maintain stable governance. The skepticism that comes with every economic decision being accompanied by a political message. the boredom of seeing daily meals also being affected by strategy. No one wants to have to explain to their grandchild why a familiar dish is missing from a meal just because two countries can't talk to each other. A tomato is not just a commodity, it's a sign. A sign of a world where decisions from afar are getting closer than ever before. Right down to the pockets, the meals and the daily emotions of every citizen. Sometimes maps don't need to be redrawn with a pen, but with refrigerated containers, long-term contracts and handshakes absent of Washington. Over the past 3 decades, North American trade has almost revolved around a single axis, the American axis. Every shipping route from avocados in Michoacán to electronic components in Guadalajara passes through Houston, El Paso, or Laredo before going anywhere else. But when Mexico began shifting supply chains to Canada, not just tomatoes, but also strawberries, avocados, and even assembly components, that axis began to tilt. The map of commercial power is no longer the absolute focus. It's becoming a network, and Canada is quietly becoming the connecting point. The shift goes beyond just a few vegetable export contracts. A series of Mexico-Canada logistics projects are being proposed. The cross-border railway line proposed by CPKC is expanding to Manitoba. Halifax Port increases investment in refrigerated container infrastructure. Mexican development banks provide preferential credit to export companies heading north. And most importantly, Canada is not just a destination, it's a gateway to open up the European market. Previously, every country in the region had to weigh the balance between pleasing Washington and maintaining economic interests. Now many Latin American countries are starting to see Canada as a quiet and stable partner rather than a boisterous superpower whose political calendar revolves around each election season. Is this the moment Mexico and Canada write a duet? Without a conductor, a tomato rolling off a supermarket shelf could be random. But when millions of balls are all going in a different direction, that's a choice. And that choice is redrawing the map of commercial power across the entire continent. No one would have thought a tomato could say so much. It doesn't speak. It's not protesting. It just disappeared from American supermarkets and appearing brighter than ever on Canadian shelves. The story seems simple, just a tax and administrative decision. But behind it is cold trains changing direction. American families have to consider every dish. Mexican producers feel more respected working with Toronto than with Washington. And Canada, which had long been on the sidelines of trade and political negotiations, suddenly became the main player simply because they didn't do anything excessive. They're just opening the doors. Perhaps sometimes it is stability itself that is the true strength in a world full of volatility. If a tomato can leave, how many other things are on the way? If Mexico finds it difficult to trust an old friend, what will other partners, Asian and European, think? And if Canada can embrace a multi-billion-dollar industry simply by having an open attitude, what is the real lesson? This is no longer just a matter for a single country, a single industry, or a single tomato. This is a test of how countries treat each other and their own citizens. What do you think? Is this a wise strategy to protect American agriculture? Or was it a move that unintentionally handed the entire trade sector over to a more friendly competitor? Please leave your comments below, as every comment is a perspective worth listening to. And if you find analyses like this necessary in the context of an increasingly complex world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can look at the world together more closely, deeply and truly. All content in the video is based on public information sources from international press and government agencies with the aim of multifaceted analysis and reflection, not representing any organization or political viewpoint. All comments are for reference only and encourage critical thinking and constructive discussion.